And now, The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes on 702.
Let's walk the talk.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by ABSA Corporate and Investment Banking, a Pan-African bank that's invested in your story because your story matters. Good evening. Welcome to your Money Show tonight. I don't know how often you get a phone call from someone on WhatsApp. It happens most of the time. Probably between a third and two-thirds of the calls I get nowadays are on WhatsApp, depending on the day, depending on who I'm speaking to. And I don't mind one way or another, but the one thing that bugs me is that on WhatsApp you have lag and on normal voice calls you don't. And I don't know if you have a preference. Often the WhatsApp calls are better, and that's fine. The quality is better. That's why radio stations like that sort of thing. But you still get the lag, and I miss that interaction with a person. I don't know if they've heard me. I don't know if the pause, and you forget in a conversation how much a pause really matters. I mean, it really matters. Sometimes it's everything. And particularly I find in interviews and that kind of conversation, a professional conversation, you know, if someone pauses, why are they pausing? If they jump to something, that shows you that they're ready and prepared. Often it can mean other things too. I bring this up because we'll speak to Shameel Joosub, the CEO of Vodacom, in a few moments and ask him that question about what they're seeing in terms of their numbers and what that means for their revenue as well. And I mean, Vodacom, they're sort of in a business that really most of us can't do without. You need data. You need to be able to make voice calls, but they have had problems in Ethiopia. Fly Safair, I see, they're going to court to challenge this finding by the International Air Service Council that they are in fact not South African owned. And it seems that really the situation here is all about trusts, and we'll hear from an expert a little later in the Money Show this evening. But Fly Safair have to prove that they are South African owned effectively, and this is a complaint that comes from their competitors. As I understand it, the sort of final trust is owned in Ireland. No expert on the matter when it comes to the legality of this, but it's owned through South Africans. I can just see how complex all of this can get. All of that said, you should be able to make a finding on it pretty quickly. The one thing that did frustrate me is we did reach out to Fly Safair today. We did ask them to come on the Money Show. They refused. They said because the case is now before court, they can't talk about it. I'm sorry, Fly Safair, but you are absolutely and fundamentally wrong. And when it comes to the sub judice rule, it really doesn't exist anymore. I mean, just accept that. I'll point you to the Nugent judgment if you want. I'll point you to the speech by then Deputy Chief Justice Telecom about the sub judice rule. Feel free to have an argument, not on trusts with me, but on that with me if you like. And frankly, if you or any politician refuse to come on the radio, I don't believe, and you quote the sub judice rule, I don't believe it's got anything to do with the law. I think it's because you have questions you don't want to answer. So I'm afraid to say that when it comes to Fly Safair tonight, a little bit disappointed in that. And in them, frankly, on this. There's a fascinating book out. It's called Same as Ever. And we'll hear more about it in about an hour. And I was struck by the idea of the book, that certain things just last for a very long time, almost forever. They just don't change. And when you consider everything that's happening, that's moving around you at the moment, if you consider, for example, that you have Donald Trump coming into the White House and probably going to change many things. This is a day that Bitcoin hit record highs. You would think that the idea that some things don't change might be quite, well, sobering, I think, for some people, maybe comforting, and I don't blame you, frankly, particularly in these times. Anyway, we'll hear more about that idea a little later in the program. Good to hear from you. 011 883 0702 021 446 0567. Voice notes tonight on 072 702 1702.
702.
702.
Stephen is on the Money Show.
6 to 8 p.m.
Confirmation from Vodacom today. It's reporting slightly lower headline earnings in the 6 months to the end of September, despite the fact revenue was up by over 10% on a normalized basis. Vodacom says the real problem was the currency depreciation in Ethiopia. That, as you can imagine, had a big impact on their bottom line. But the number of Vodacom subscribers in South Africa rose by 4% to just over 49 million. The CEO of Vodacom is Shameel Joosub. Shameel, good evening to you. Clearly, the situation in Ethiopia had a big impact on your group results as a whole.
It did, Stephen. Thank you for having me on the show. Particularly because we had a devaluation 2 months ago, and effectively you then have to take the day one impact of all your dollar-based leases and so on into account. So that then, it takes into account the next 10 years of that impact immediately. So we had to bring that into account. So that cost us 1.1 billion during the first half of the year.
I mean, there's been...
Of course...
Go on.
So of course, it gets better during the second half because the startup losses will be divided by a lower currency as well. So that helps to offset some of the impacts. But then you're also working through the impacts, during the next year, the remainder of the year and into the following years.
There's been a period where I suppose companies like yours that operate in several countries have had issues with currency depreciation. It's happened in Nigeria too, obviously. How worried are you that we might be about to enter a period where it happens in more places more often?
I think, generally we've seen more stability on our currencies. I mean, of course, there has been the fluctuation. The biggest fluctuations for us historically has been the rand. Of course, we have introduced new risk, but also new opportunity by bringing on both Egypt and Ethiopia into the stable. And I mean, we had the devaluation in Egypt in March, which is, of course, affecting our reported numbers. But if you're looking at the net profit line, the devaluation was 60%, and the business grew 75% in net profit. So more than offsetting that, that devaluation. So, Stephen, the one thing, that with these things is one then needs to have the patience to see it through. So you are going to have periods of volatility. And when you operate in markets like that, it's something that, we and our shareholders will have to understand.
In South Africa, your number of subscribers was up 4%, but your revenue, your service revenue, was only up 1.3%. Are you not getting much revenue from new subscribers? I imagine you have some subscribers who've been with you for years who give you a certain amount of revenue. And newer subscribers, some of them will give you a lot, some of them will give you almost no revenue.
The South African results got to do more with the wholesale revenues, where effectively we've re-signed the sales agreement at a lower rate. And then, of course, Telecom pricing also in terms of the wholesale agreement also having changed. So those impacts will hit you, and then, of course, from there you grow again. But you have to you've had the benefit for years, and now you're having to re-sign at a different rate. So I think that's what's impacting the revenue line. And that cost us about 2.4% during the half in terms of growth rates. But as far as customers go, I think on the contract side, still seeing strong growth. On the prepaid side, it's been more subdued, with about a 2.2% growth in prepaid revenue. Of course, we'd like that number to grow more strongly, and that's come more from voice declines, and it's come from data. Data traffic still very strong at 32% growth.
I mean, more and more people, of course, make their phone calls on WhatsApp. They don't use a voice anymore, and that must have an impact.
It's definitely having an impact, and so you've got, a -5 on voice, and a positive 9 on data revenue. But prepaid voice revenue, if you look across the group, is about 19% of our revenue. So it has come down quite substantially over the years, but we are going through a transition of voice onto data channels, so voice being carried over data.
There's been no load shedding in South Africa for several months. There's still load reduction, which might well affect some of your towers. It's usually cheaper to buy from the grid than to use generators. Is that having a big impact, the fact there's no load shedding?
Yeah, so what we have done is, of course, some of them where you've already put the generators permanently on to the sites are still there. What you are seeing is lower fuel usage and so on. So you're definitely using less fuel with electricity availability having been approved. Of course, you're still having load reductions, and you still have some municipalities where you still have outages, so you still have a need for those generators. But certainly has reduced our costs, and it's reduced our capex that we're deploying. So it's given us the ability to take some of that 11 billion a year investment and put it back into rural coverage, more capacity, 5G, fiber to the site, all of the things that we should have been doing, that we had to divert money from to put batteries into the network.
Are you still investing as much as you were into generation capacity, which is a polite way of asking if you think load shedding will ever return?
No, we're not. We've actually pulled back, and now, putting more of it into things like rural coverage and so on. Of course, we maintain the investment that we've made. So, should load shedding come back, we would still have the necessary batteries and investment that we've already made.
You are obviously disappointed at the decision by the Competition Tribunal, I think 2-3 weeks ago now, to stop your merger with Maziv. That would have seen you working with Vumatel. In fact, you've described that decision as a travesty. You're in a difficult position because you're still waiting for the reasons for the decision. But when you get those reasons, are you going to go to I think it's the Competition Appeal Court you'd go to?
We're probably going to have to make a decision before that, Stephen, because the reasons don't come out quick enough, which is one of the issues. That is one of the options that we are considering. Honestly, I think, as I said, I think it's a travesty for South Africa more than it is even for Vodacom, because I think, the fiber investment would have really helped to take fiber to more homes. We're at 6 million homes today, 17 million homes in the country. So there's still a lot that needs to be done, and this investment would have basically been able to provide that. Well, with a 14 to 70 billion investment and then another 25 billion in capex, quite a material investment into fiber in South Africa. And frankly speaking, I don't see lots of other people standing in line waiting to put that level of investment into South Africa.
The fact it took 3 full years just to get a no, and you can still appeal and possibly an appeal after that. I mean, I presume you would say that the regulatory system takes too long. 3 years is a huge amount of time.
No, and it's extremely frustrating because I think, if you're going to say no, you can also say no in a much shorter space. I just think we have to relook at, taking two parts really. One is 3 years. It's just way too long, as you say. And then the second part is we have to look at these things from on a more fact basis in terms of, Vodacom's got, to put in perspective, 2.5% market share in fiber. So I'm not sure what we're solving for, because, if it was two big competitors merging, I can understand. But in this case, Vodacom has very little on fiber. And, the narrative is that, or certainly was at the Competition Commission, but Vodacom will invest. Vodacom hasn't invested, and I think, there's, besides the 11 billion that it invests every year. So, this was an opportunity to gain more capital for South Africa. And of course, we compete for capital within the broader Vodacom Group. So, this is of course very, very disappointing for me personally as well, because I really, put a lot of effort into making sure that we could get this investment.
Shameel Joosub, the CEO at Vodacom. Thank you very much indeed for your time on The Money Show.
The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes.
Well, confirmation now that the airline FlySafair taking the SA International Air Services Council to court over its findings that FlySafair's shareholding is illegal. Under the law, a domestic airline has to be 75% owned by South Africans. The competitors of FlySafair say it's actually almost 75% owned by foreign nationals, although through a trust that seems to be, depending on how you view these things, eventually headquartered in Ireland. FlySafair strongly disputes that. I should point out that none of this relates to FlySafair's domestic license. Domestic and international flights are under different licenses. Putejo Mojapele is an aviation analyst, joins us now. Putejo, good evening to you. I mean, this was predictable. FlySafair were always going to take this finding to court.
Yeah, it was. They have done that before, Stephen. They went to seek clarity before the court, and they could not come out with the same results that they would wish to have. And what amazes me about their response now running to court to interdict the council for publishing or to imposing sanction to them is that when this matter was ventilated, clearly there were signs that were showing that they are in contravention with the law, with the regulation, and therefore what would have been an issue for them or easier for them is to start looking at how to rectify what seems to be the problem or bone of contention from Airlink and as well as the global. But they did not do anything. Probably they were just bargaining on the fact that they would be seen as trying to basically admitting guilty as such. But they shouldn't be going to court now because it's a self-inflicted pain that they have basically done on this one.
I mean, they seem to claim, as I understand it, that they've had legal advice that shows that what they're doing is legal. I mean, they're going to have to show the legal advice. I can't imagine what that argument could be based on. I must just remind everyone that they didn't want to come on the radio tonight.
Yeah, I don't know what sort of legal. By the way, the chairperson of this council that have found them guilty, she is an advocate, by the way, by profession. She's a practicing advocate, and she's very sharp when it comes to these kind of things. And I think even from the beginning when they started these processes, it was quite clear. The evidence that was produced by Global, let me just deal with the global evidence that Global brought. Global brought quite an extensive evidence and also argument that they have put forward to justify the fact that why they're saying SAF Air is not compliant with the regulation, and they could just not, they couldn't just move out of that with any tangible fact that they are indeed in the right way of the regulation. And I don't seem to understand why would it be at this time they think that the chairperson might have read the regulation wrong. I doubt. In fact, it's something that they should be preparing themselves to how to spin this because sanction is imminent. On the 28th of this month, we will be seeing them being grounded. I think that is imminent.
I mean, it's quite a big thing to ground an airline for something that's got nothing to do with safety, nothing to do with, any kind of sharp practice in terms of competition, just because of who owns you. I mean, it's crying out for a constitutional challenge under the law.
Stephen, the law is the law. These other competitors that took them to the council, they would have done the same thing. They would have went into the market and also get partners that could also pump in money into their business and get an artificial growth that SAF Air has enjoyed for the past couple of months, that they've been growing quite artificially on the market. And when you look at Lyft, when you look at Airlink, they would have done the same. I mean, if you have a partner who can pump in the money, it's unfair. And I think for us to limit this thing to just a shareholder kind of a thing and think that, it is just a shareholder anyway, it's got nothing really much to do with safety. It's got nothing to do with any other important safety concerns that might bring the airline or danger the economy or even the passengers. It is very important. The taxes were not paid. You lied under oath when you apply for AOC that you are properly constituted, yet you are not properly constituted.
Thanks very much indeed. Aviation analyst. Really appreciate the time on The Money Show tonight.
The Money Show.
The markets.
Tana Mongwe is portfolio manager at Macro Solutions at Old Mutual Investment Group. Tana, good evening to you. Results out from Vodacom. We heard from the CEO a few moments ago. And obviously quite a lot is changing in this space and still frustration over the competition tribunal ruling.
Hi, Stephen. Thank you very much for having me on tonight, and good evening to your listeners. Yes, I think absolutely one of the headwinds that Vodacom and the other telecom operators in South Africa have been facing is just regulatory headwinds. Absolutely, and I mean, they're just trying to invest in growth. I mean, this Vodacom spoke about fiber. They're still a small player in the market, and they're just trying to invest in new avenues for growth for their business. But regulation remains quite a big headwind.
Raubex, their infrastructure materials construction group, they say they've had a big surge in half-year profit. There's more activity about road building. I mean, are we getting a bit closer to the president's promise to turn the country into a construction site?
Absolutely. And I mean, if you look at Raubex, year-to-date performance has been absolutely phenomenal. And the order book has, I mean, it speaks for itself. They've got an order book of about 24 billion. But what's interesting is just how they've managed to diversify where the volume of work where that comes from. Whereas previously they were just a road building construction company, they've managed to diversify to infrastructure, and they've actually grown through renewable energy construction within the private space. They've also managed to grow within the mining sector through the acquisition of their chrome mining operation, Balba, which has actually started to deliver into earnings, and we see that in the results today.
A lot more information coming out about Boxer there, their pre-listing statement.
Yes. Boxer, a very, very interesting company, and actually the crown jewel of the Pick and Pay Group cluster. Quite interesting. Just under 500 stores across South Africa and Eswatini, but they're looking to actually double over the medium term in terms of number of stores, double in terms of earnings and revenue and so forth. And they just, organic growth story in the South African retail cluster.
And then Woolworths, I mean, there's a lot in the Woolworths update today for the 18 weeks to September. The thing that struck me was that growth in stores sales in their food group, their food division, is up 12%. Everyone tells us how tough life is, how tough inflation has been, but Woolworths Food is up 12% in volume.
It continues to just generate those revenues. The food cluster has been doing quite well, and we actually see it coming through volume growth and not just price inflation. But actually, the low inflation has been benefiting volumes. What's quite interesting about the Woolworths food cluster is what we can expect to see from Absolute Pets, which they acquired earlier this year. And once that we start seeing full year earnings from that consolidation, I think it's going to be quite interesting. But absolutely, I think discretionary spend across South Africans remains low. But with the lower interest rates, the lower load shedding, and you're actually seeing the impact of the two-part system potentially also coming through, starting to signal some green shoots in terms of South African consumers' discretionary income. And we think that's with the Woolworths numbers.
Tana Mongwe, thanks very much indeed. Portfolio Manager at Macro Solutions at the Old Mutual Investment Group. Bringing the time to a few seconds after 6:30.
The Money Show on 702.
Monday to Friday, 6 to 8 p.m.
16 minutes to 7 the time. You know the number 011 883 0702 021 446 0567. I don't know if you have a strong view on Fly Sapphire and their ownership. Should their ownership stand in the way of whether they're allowed to operate or not? Also, this conversation around a WhatsApp call, so call it a computer call, a Zoom call if you like, versus a normal sort of cell phone call. And look, the cell phone conversations often aren't great, and lots of interference, etc. But at least they're in real time, as I would call it. You kind of know where you are. You don't get these gaps. And the gaps in the WhatsApp calls drive me absolutely mad. Well, in other news today, the chemicals, explosives, fertilizers group Omnia today reporting its operating profit is up by 17% in the 6 months to the end of September. Their revenue is up by 5% to nearly 11 billion rand. They say they've been able to increase market share by winning new business. The CEO at Omnia is Seelan Gobalsamy. Seelan, good evening to you. It's been a tough environment for most people. Your operating profit is up 17%. What changed for you during this period?
Yeah, good evening, Stephen, and good evening to all your listeners. I think the big drivers of our operating profit being up 17%, which is a great performance for the half year, is the contribution from our mining segment. Our mining segment saw growth locally in South Africa, in West Africa, and globally in Canada, Indonesia, and also our mining chemicals business in Namibia. So that was the first driver of the uptick in profit. The second was our agriculture South African business, so the local business. That business had an increase in volumes, which also translated in an increase in profits, driven by a strong supply chain and manufacturing complex.
Did you have to compete hard on price to do this?
I think whether it's farmers or mines, price is always an issue. I think we win business based on our technologies and based on the strength of our supply chain and manufacturing complex. So, what we've been able to demonstrate over the last few years is the ability not to drop our customers and not to have the supply chain issues that we've seen in SADC. So I think if I look at our new contract wins in the mining business, that was probably the underpin. The underpin was a strong supply chain, strong manufacturer, and the ability to have product and have redundancy in that supply chain. That's caused us to win new business. We've also opened up new markets for our business. So, we sell in new markets globally, which has increased our profits. And also, we've sold product into different parts of the value chain. So sell product on a wholesale basis, which we would call a new market for us.
Right.
But price is always a factor. I don't think you can win if you don't have a competitive price.
No, sure, but reliability is clearly the factor that you're trading on as well.
Absolutely, and safety. Explosives is a complex business, and we've got to be doing that very safely as well.
We've been through a period of high inflation coming down now. Load shedding also seems to be over now. All of that must have had an impact on your final results, and the fact that inflation is coming down and load shedding for the moment is over, that must have helped.
Yeah, so, load shedding, we've invested quite heavily into solar, reverse osmosis, worrying about water infrastructure and rail and road transportation. So we're still concerned about infrastructure disruptions generally. And while load shedding has stopped or slowed down locally, you still find, and let's just take the drought in Zambia as an example. That's impacted electricity supply in Zambia. It's slowed down economic growth. It's slowed down agriculture, and it's had an impact on mining. So, I think we still have to keep a keen eye and watch on infrastructure, energy, rail, ports. It's still a very, very challenging environment out there.
You would have had stronger results if it wasn't for this tax dispute in Zimbabwe. It goes back several years. You've flagged it before. You've been transparent about it. It's about paying taxes in US dollars, though. Do you believe you'll be able to get to some kind of result with that dispute soon? I think the SADC operating environment is a very complex one. You've got regulators, you've got the climate change issues, you've got currency fluctuations, hyperinflation. So a very complex operating environment. We have got our teams working together with the revenue authorities to solve this, and I'm sure we will solve it in a way that is amicable for all parties concerned. You say that. Zimbabwe, you're confident you'll get a just and fair result there? The authorities, lots of questions about how things operate, really.
No, I think, where we don't believe, and using the words of just and fair, where we don't believe there's a just and fair result, as a group, we will have to reconsider what we do in the various territories we operate in. But where we don't believe the law and the execution thereof and the stability is within our risk appetite, we will reconsider what we do in those environments. And we have made decisions to change business models, to slow down capital allocation, and to do things differently where we are uncomfortable with the way things work. But hopefully this we can solve. But having said that, where there's environments where we do not want to be part of those environments, we will reallocate our capital elsewhere.
You are exposed to the agricultural sector, so seasons matter. We're in summer, maize growing season particularly. We're expecting sort of heavier rains. That would mean that your outlook for the next 6 months is pretty positive.
So, our agriculture segment has got three parts to it. It's got the global agriculture business based out of Australia. Our outlook there is fairly positive. We are seeing good volumes and good demand for that product globally. And then, the one we've just spoken about, the agriculture in SADC, there we're a lot more cautious. We're concerned about the operating environment, and we're concerned about the medium-term impacts of the drought that's taking place. But in South Africa, clearly, we are very positive about the agriculture segment here. Our volumes are up. There's good agronomic conditions, and we've seen, good planting conditions, and the rains have come. Having said that, climate change is always out there, and we must be awake to agilely move. Should the rains be less than anticipated, or in some instances be more than anticipated? But you're right, agriculture SA positive, global agriculture positive, and SADC fairly cautious outside of South Africa. I think we still see a chunk of headwinds there from a currency stability, regulatory governance, and drought perspective.
Seelan Gabelsami, good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. CEO at Omnia. More on climate change, by the way, in the next couple of moments. We'll be looking ahead to the COP29 conference in Baku in Azerbaijan.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa CIB, a Pan-African bank invested in your story and the potential it can unlock because your story matters. Absa is a registered FSP.
Well, with the world leaders gathering for the COP29 conference in Baku in Azerbaijan this week, still important questions about what nations from our continent should really be pushing for. There are many different predictions, but there is some evidence now that climate change could reduce incomes on Africa by 30% in just the next 25 years. Msizi Khoza is the Managing Executive for ESG at Absa Corporate and Investment Banking. Msizi, good evening. We know climate change is already affecting us. We know it's going to have a bigger impact. What should our agenda, by our agenda I mean the African agenda, be for the conference of the parties gathering?
Yeah, very good evening, Stephen, and good evening to your listeners as well. Thanks for having me. No, I think this is this sort of current climate summit is arguably perhaps the most important in the fight for a more climate just world, Stephen. I mean the conference really will be defined by what's being called this new collective quantifiable goal, the NCQG, a mouthful of an acronym if there ever was one. And it's really about, developed nations committing to greater levels of climate investment. You may recall, the 2009 Copenhagen commitment to raise and mobilize $100 billion per annum. Of course, that number has been notoriously missed. And so I think, in this particular 29th installment of the COP, African nations and governments, should be pursuing and pushing very hard for a much more ambitious goal and target. But at the same time, I think we ought to be quite realistic because I think there is a very real possibility that despite this conference being billed as the finance COP, that it may not live up to expectations. And so whilst we should indeed, and African countries should be pushing for a much more ambitious target, and a target which does not elevate sovereign distress levels, and prioritizes more concessionary loans and grants, that we should ought also to think more deeply and creatively about some of the other options and paths that are available. Should this particular COP fail to live up to expectations?
Well, I mean, Donald Trump's going back to the White House, Msizi, and I realize that he's not president now of the U.S. I realize the U.S. isn't the world's biggest polluter. I think China still is, or at least was 2 years ago. But isn't that a very real problem? I mean, in the end, it always boils down to the same thing, to get the global north to cough up enough money to sort this out.
No, look, absolutely. I think that the results of the U.S. election indeed cast a very long shadow over the deliberations at this particular COP. And I think Henry Kissinger once said, look, foreign policy is always an extension of domestic policy. And so, we expect definitely, that there might very well be a change in posture from the U.S. As well as the other, of course, developed nations as well, like the European Union, etc. And I think this just underscores the point even further, Stephen, to say, to some extent, African nations and governments ought to be looking within, thinking more creatively about ways to tap into domestic pools of capital to ensure that, we mobilize the necessary funding and resources, for adaptation in particular, in order for us to be on a much better footing to increase our own competitiveness globally, but also to the point you made, right just now in the introduction around protecting lives and livelihoods. Sure. Because I think oftentimes, we think about the climate agenda and the climate question and just think, it's all scientific, but this very much, Stephen, touches lives and touches people, sure, which means that it's very much an economic issue as well.
Two countries, China and India, as I understand it, you'll know more about me more than I do about them, have really changed policy around this, and they generate power, a lot of it through solar energy. Yes, China still has a large number of coal-fired power stations, but they've changed very, very quickly. And they've found the money. And I think if they've found the money, South Africa should be able to find the money. And that would hopefully start a big change across the continent. And we shouldn't forget that when it comes to Africa, well, Eskom and Sasol are the two people you need to look at.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think we obviously can't have a debate or a discussion about about the transition without mentioning those two names, and the point around funding. I mean, at ABSA, in certainly where I sit in the corporate and investment bank, we are deeply committed to this agenda. We're one of the largest financiers of renewable energy, not just in South Africa, but on the continent. And so, we're not just, we're not just talking the talk here, but also, I think, are willing to put the resources, the energy, the skills, to walk really shoulder to shoulder with our clients as they try to change their business models. And we believe that this transition, Stephen, will require capital and very specialized support, and as a firm, we stand, ready to assist our clients and to support the transition, not just for them, but for the entire country and the continent too, because this is undoubtedly the single greatest challenge of our time.
Msizi Khoza, thank you, Managing Executive for ESG at ABSA Corporate and Investment Banking. You're with The Money Show, 7:00.
And now, The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes on 702.
Let's walk the talk.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by ABSA Corporate and Investment Banking, a Pan-African bank that's invested in your story because your story matters. Good evening, welcome. I'm Stephen Grootes. Glad you're with us this evening on The Money Show. Plenty to come. From 7:30, we'll speak to Selo Makeka, the actor. We'll talk about his journey with money through the years. I'll ask him where he first got paid to act. Was he even acting when he first got paid? Was he not maybe moving stuff around in a theatre? So many people started in that way. But we'll talk about that. We'll talk about his career. We'll talk also about how you manage money in that space. Not an easy thing to do. It's a bit of feast or famine is the old English expression for that. There's a fascinating book out. It's called Same as Ever. And it's about the fact that so many things stay the same. We'll be talking about that a little later with Bronwyn Williams as well, the trend translator and future finance specialist at Flux Trends. I find that absolutely fascinating. In a moment, also an update on who in South Africa is in demand, which people are leaving because of their professional qualifications. Still just fascinated by the idea of the sort of tension, if you like, between WhatsApp calls and cell phone, normal voice calls. And it's also one of those things I found younger people much more likely to make a WhatsApp call, older people much more likely to make a voice call. And I think that's just because of what you're used to. But it's a funny thing about technology. I mean, I remember years ago, the first time that a cell phone that I had, I mean, this would be pre-Android probably, Apple, would actually do video calls. But I never used it. Never used it. The moment WhatsApp came and allowed video calls, people were doing it all the time. And I can't say to you what changed, why a phone that had always been capable of doing a video call, you just, for 5 years did nothing with that, and suddenly there was a nice interface and you used it. I mean, it says so much about human beings, doesn't it? And I was reminded that actually one of the things that is changing is around SMSs. And there was a time, for a long period of time, when an SMS was literally just a message. Now that technology seems to be catching up with WhatsApp and is going to try and compete with WhatsApp. And maybe we'll look into that a little bit more and see actually if we're able to get a little bit more. Maybe Siphumelele Zondi or someone is able to fill us in on how that is changing, because I think that could be very interesting for the way you communicate for your business. Good to hear from you. 011 883 0702 021 446 0567.
The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes, live on 92.7 and 106 FM. Streaming on the Prime Media Plus app
and DSTV channel 856.
Well, some evidence now that people who particularly have experience in healthcare and agriculture may be trying to leave the country and move to Canada. It's based on data from Canadian authorities. They've been looking at how many people are trying to move into that country. Andrew Woodburn is the Managing Director at Amrop WoodburnMann. Andrew, good evening. I mean, this has been a perennial conversation in South Africa for years and years and years. Who is leaving? What does the evidence say? Who is leaving?
Yes. Stephen, good evening to you and your listeners. I mean, the title of the article caught my eye. The top five professionals kissing South Africa goodbye. And I, on reflection, felt they weren't kissing South Africa goodbye. They were waving goodbye to us in a hurry, and we were kissing their money goodbye. And so I did have a look, and I think it's quite interesting. Over 4 years, it seems like the Canadian outflow in particular is up at over 7,000 of these sort of top five sectors of professionals. Of course, as you mentioned, the medical industry is a significant departing group, of which over 600 have left, of which 350 are specialists. You know, these are the neurosurgeons and the cardiologists and so on that anybody in our country, from whether you go to a public healthcare service or private, are going to want to need. And it's not race specific. And then you ask yourself what the other half are doing, and those are theatre sisters and so on, who are also leaving, highly experienced individuals who are finding another home elsewhere. So that's the medical side. The farmers you mentioned, over 348 granted. Financial experts, believe it or not, mechanics and technical artisans are leaving. And then, of course, the sportsmen with some recreational, the artists and entertainers. But these are all individuals who create a circular economy in our environment. And without their skills, we lose their income, we lose their expenditure, we lose their experience, we lose their training. And really, in some ways, and I mean, you didn't hear it from me, you know, this is brain drain 2 extension now. And I'll tell you for a fact, the first 4 destinations we all know. The first 4 destinations have been there since 94, which were the US, the UK, Australia, and of course, Israel. So those 4 we've known well have had departees targeting those environments, primarily because, of course, they're English-speaking. They run in a similar free market environment. But there's 2 new ones on the block, and we're talking particularly tonight about Canada, but in some cases I also know New Zealand to be a sort of vulture sitting on the wires, preying on our poor people and talent policies that are triggering people interested in leaving. We're not helping ourselves. But, of course, on the other side of the coin, they now attracting this talent because they see that it's easy value for money. So not good for our economy, not good for our skills pool. And then likewise, of course, we are not able at a policy level even to bring in new talent, either to replace them or to even enhance our ability to bring technology, digital skills, and more and more and more into the country on a sort of quid pro quo roundabout, right? So, Stephen, this is not good.
Yeah.
These stats are not good for us.
I mean, there's a lot going on here. I mean, roughly 1 million New Zealanders live outside the country. That's 20% of the country's population. They're wringing their hands at people who are leaving New Zealand because many of them go to Australia. They have a close agreement between the two and close culture and both rubbish at rugby. But they also have, I mean, they are complaining about what you and I are complaining tonight, people leaving their country. We're complaining about people going to, perhaps to New Zealand. I mean, obviously Canada's the focus. But New Zealanders are leaving New Zealand.
So this is also a pattern that I think maybe you and I will talk about over the next few weeks, which I reflect on as our great skills in the big basin of the global skill set. And that our labor is as well skilled in some cases with a better attitude, better work ethic, more experience, younger because we do have accelerated development here, because we have high demand and low supply. And then similarly, and you and I over the past have had this discussion of, well, what should they get paid and are they being overpaid? And Economics 101 on the supply and demand curve says, if we underpay here and demand is higher somewhere else, then skills flow to where they're paid and needed. And so I think this comes back to that last cornerstone that us in the free market have very little control over, and that, of course, is labor policy. And I'm not talking blue-collar laborers. We know we need to create more employment. But in fact, I worry at an economics level that if we lose the top end of the pyramid, can we even support upskill and engage the mid and lower levels of the pyramid? Because we have, over the years, and the decades now of the new South Africa, heard repeatedly people saying, well, if we lose this or we lose that, we'll just uplift it by promoting people from within. But I do think we're beginning to learn now that that comes with its own set of risks.
I mean, this conversation's happening, 3-4 weeks after the Home Affairs Minister announced much easier visa regulations to get skills into the country as well, and in a way where, maybe importing skills simply because we've lost some of the skills. So when people decide to leave a country, there are a few things. The first is, will they find work? And if you have particular qualifications and you can convert that qualification, then that's much easier. And that's probably why we're seeing the kind of people that we're seeing, mechanics and doctors. They have qualifications that translate.
You're dead on, Stephen. It's got much worse that these destination countries have figured out the flow of talent. And in fact, they're now attracting talent. So some of these embassies in the past and right now hold information evenings where you can attend the embassy and they sort of pitch to you what they're looking for, how they're fishing for it, what the rewards might be in terms of, this article in particular that we're referring to talks about temporary work permits. But those are classed as temporary in order to get you there so that you spend your 3 or 5 years until you qualify for citizenship. So they don't guarantee you citizenship to start with. But they're very clear what they're fishing for. Our labor guidelines at senior executive level has been, we don't want anybody of talent here. It's really difficult to get permits to bring in top talent because in the dispensation for the last 3 decades, it's been like, well, they're taking a job from somebody who we want to promote there. Actually, we have so much demand that we can't service it internally ourselves at this point in time. And what's beginning to emerge is, in some ways, the war for talent is now a global opportunity or battlefield to play on. And if you're not being proactive, you're not being able to target, attract, and retain top talent, you will begin to slide down the economic ladder, snakes and ladders of productivity, innovation, and so on.
Does what's happening in other places matter? Britain is poorer than it was. It's been flirting with populism. It's decided against that finally, but the damage has been done. The US has decided it's not yet done with populism, and they're going to give it another go. Does all of that matter? Going to the push factors and the pull factors. So Canada, very attractive, although they might be about to dump their prime minister too. But generally speaking, compared to, Britain and particularly the US, Canada would look attractive, but overall, people might look at what's happening in the US and decide, actually, I'm going to stay at home, thanks.
So when I talk to departing executives, Stephen, it's a very good point. The push factors, which we know well, not even going to unpack them, but they're things like crime, safety, the future for their children, and so on. The push factors are quite strong and definitely start often the perspective of let's look out there. I don't find the pull factors, the ones you've just mentioned, as a determining factor. Why? Because every 4 years the political dispensation may change. But the interesting thing on these these 6+ destinations that I've shared with you is that in fact they're free market oriented, they're very open to competition, they laud and value merit. And so, for example, the North Americas, whether it's Canada or the USA, celebrate both entrepreneurialism, celebrate corporate success. If you look at the markets, then they deliver the dividends back. And so the political spectrum at this point doesn't seem to be a deterrent. It's that is the destination country presenting a better set of criteria than our push factors? And then comes the bureaucracy. Is it easier to get in? Am I facilitated to arrive? And these information evenings I'm sharing about you and the internet, for example, will essentially look to marry your skills with an opportunity so that when you depart, you have the stability of an income and state support on the other side. And that is what I call a flow that has almost been designed by the destination country. They don't have to trigger the push factors from here. But if they facilitate your transition in an easier manner, so they will begin to benefit from the flow from us. And, for us, for example, to retrain, let's say, a black female theater nurse, head theater nurse who's used to working in hospitals on heart transplants and so on, we can't make another one of those in 5 or 6 years. That's a 25-year career journey that we are just unable to replace immediately.
Andrew Woodburn, thank you. Managing Director at Amrop WoodburnMann. Very sobering.
702. Stephen is on X.
At Stephen Grootes.
On the next Money Show, personal finance expert and co-founder of Galileo Capital, Warren Ingram, will share tips on how to prepare for the festive season to prevent a bad start to the new year, the do's and don'ts of celebrating the festive season without breaking the bank. Dr. Otendo Ndwingwi, founding director, Tribe Africa Advisory, author of Rumble in the Jungle Reloaded, will update you on the important business news from around the continent on the Africa Business Report. Also, all of your top business stories of the day.
The Money Show.
Business books.
Well, there's a book out. It's called Same as Ever. Some things just don't seem to change, I suppose, is what the book is about. It's by Morgan Housel and Bronwyn Williams, trend translator, future finance specialist of Flux Trends, has been looking through it for us. Bronwyn, good evening. I presume this is about things in money that do not change and therefore they're the same as ever.
Yeah, pretty much. Lessons in both life and money. I think first a little bit of context. This is Morgan's second book. His first one, The Psychology of Money, has been a bestseller for quite a long time. I will brag and say that I was following him on the app formerly known as Twitter long before he was famous enough to go and get a book deal, based on his very eloquently written, almost like sort of chicken soup parables for the sort of business or investor's soul that he was writing on his blog at the time. That was a first turn into the first collection of essays that turned up being The Psychology of Money, and now this one follows in the same style. It's another collection of his best, or at least in his opinion, I suppose, best essays that are somewhat linked to this topic of the things that do and do not stay the same, which are obviously pretty critical lessons for anyone that hopes to make any sort of money betting for or against human nature, which is what every investor really does every time they go and sit down and try to make a bet on a particular stock or a particular company, right? Because we're betting that we know a little bit more about how people will behave than they do themselves, right? So if you can get any sort of edge in terms of psychology or in terms of calmness when it comes to approaching your investment decisions, then this is the sort of book that you might be interested in. It's not an investor book full of equations. It's certainly not to do with money specifically, but it's to do with money sort of adjacently. It's the sort of timeless lessons that you could apply to your investing, but also could apply to your own life too.
I mean, it's stories, right? It's a collection of stories, and the power is in the stories.
Yeah, some of them are personal stories. I mean, the opening one, I'm sure I can give a couple of spoilers on air, given that this was all published in the public domain before it was put behind a publisher's pay gate. It deals with a very personal story that he recalls from his teenage years when he was snowboarding, where tragically 2 of his friends died in an avalanche, and he didn't because he chose not to go down that hill at a particular time. And sort of lessons he draws from that are on the randomness of tragedy, like making a very small choice can make a very big difference further down the line. Of course, just like an avalanche, not to belabor the point too much, but also how those small coincidences are what end up, making grand returns or not on your portfolio. So of course we take these grand lessons and we kind of cheapen them a little bit by trying to bring them back down to the realm of money and markets. But still, the lessons are these sorts of things that we have to understand about life, that nothing is certain, but at the same time, we can increase the odds of our certainty by understanding things that don't change about human nature, about how luck and probability play out, and the sorts of patterns that we see in the world around us.
there's a famous saying in investing that past performance is not a predictor of future results. How does that saying dovetail with a book that's called Same as Ever?
Yeah, so I think it's got to be taken as a pair along with good old Voltaire, who spoke about, of course, how, history doesn't repeat itself, but man always does. Or history doesn't repeat itself, but it's got a jolly good rhythm section if you start to look for the beat. These are the ways that we can start to say. So there's these sort of fundamental truths that pull in particular directions or particular patterns, but there's still always randomness and chance layered upon that. And that's why the past is not a perfect predictor of the future, but there are certainly patterns that are predictable, like things that like boom times create bust times, right? Because booms create irrational exuberance. They create greed, which means when things are going really, really good, you've got to start looking about when that party's going to stop. And of course, that's the hard part, like actually timing the tops and bottoms of market, but understanding that there will be ups and there will be downs. But at the same time, over time, the general trend is sort of up and to the right for most actual aspects of humanity, even if it doesn't feel like it because you're caught up in a more cyclical kind of a lower term or midterm sort of down cycle. So this is what he really wants us to talk about. And he talks about examples, for example, of people that lived through the world wars or lived through the Great Depression, how that sort of warped their psyche for the rest of their lives, that they believed the future was going to be as bad as the past. They never took the same sort of risks as someone that had been brought up in good times, that had been led to sort of expect, a more prosperous future would behave. And of course, both those ways of behaving, that's believing things will be scarce in the future just because they were in the past for you particularly, or believing things will continue to be great because they were great for you in the past, are both foolish, right? If instead you got to understand there are those ups and downs, and you should sort of plan for those different cycles. But you should also, of course, plan to occasionally kind of bet against the people that are leaning into whatever the folly is of the day, whether that be extreme pessimism or extreme optimism. And he also, of course, cautions against those short-term fluctuations, feeling like a winner because you've won in the short term, as opposed to trying to see the bigger picture as to whether you're winning over the long game. And when it comes to like investment returns, obviously chasing massive windfalls in the short term is great if you can do it. Nice work if you could get it. But a much safer strategy is obviously to sort of get just a little bit above market return for every single year. You kind of have a much better compounding effect over time. Those are the kinds of sort of parables you see here. Nothing particularly groundbreaking, if you want to put it that way. These are all things you might have seen elsewhere, but what he has done a very good job of is firstly collecting them all together and then writing about them in a very eloquent way. He is a great writer. This is why people like to read him. He has a very nice way of stringing those sermons together, because that's really what they are. These sorts of sermons, sort of medicine that we all know we don't necessarily want to take.
And Bronwyn, I mean, you're a future finance specialist. Do you believe him that these things will stay same as ever?
Yeah, well, if by same as ever you mean that sort of that rhythm section, that beat, yes, I think the beat does go on. And the thing that does stay the same is that things don't stay the same. That's the ultimate lesson of history, right? That ebbs and it flows. There's ups and there's downs. Good times create, softer men who create harder times. These are the patterns of humanity that are very, very hard to break because we're not very good at learning other people's lessons. We tend to want to learn them ourselves. And that means that there are opportunities for savvy investors who believe themselves to be, I suppose, above the baseness of human nature to, capitalize off the rest of us and our fallible fear and greed.
Bronwyn Williams, thank you very much indeed. She's a trend translator and future finance specialist at Flux Trends. The book is called Same as Ever. It's by Morgan Housel. Housel is spelled Housel. Same as Ever by Morgan Housel is what you're looking for to Google. Selo Makakangube is next with his money journey. You with The Money Show, just gone 7:30.
The Money Show on 702.
Monday to Friday, 6 to 8 p.m.
Well, time now to have a look at the money journey of someone you might have heard of, someone you've seen, someone who the moment he talks, I suspect you'll see him in your mind's eye. I'm talking about Selo Maka Kanube, the actor. He's been around for many, many years, and we're lucky enough to have him in our studio now. Selo, good evening, and thanks so much for coming in tonight.
Good evening, Stephen, and thank you for the invitation. Thank you.
You have a long career. I mean, I'm supposed to say the word illustrious there because that's the word everybody uses.
Yeah,
but it's illustrious.
One. Yeah,
you've become a household name. Can you remember the first time you came into contact with acting, and connect that with the thought of you can actually do that for money?
I think my first time with, I would say performing rather than acting.
Sure.
And I was about 4 years old.
Oh, yeah?
And my uncle, because I used to like dancing, jiving, as we call it in township language. So my uncle on Saturdays, he would take me to town. And I guess, he will pass, next to an Indian shop, and they always have a speaker on the pavement.
Yes.
And they'll be playing, the recent pop song. And boy, would I get down on the pavement. People would throw money.
Wow. And you were 4?
I was 4 years old.
Sure.
But my reward would be a packet of chips and Coca-Cola. I think my uncle would actually basically pocket most of the money. Yeah. And I mean, I would say that was, kind of like my first, realize, I didn't even realize, but there was payment for what I did.
Yes.
And then I think the first time when I actually got paid, I probably was about 17, 16, and I got a little cameo in some movie. And I remember when I went to audition, I auditioned as if I was dancing like John Travolta. But that got me the part anyway, because there was a dancing in, I was part of a dancing troupe. So I got paid for that. And my mother, said, well, okay, you've been paid, we're going to buy you a jersey because you don't have a sweat, a jersey. We went to town, and I remember we were at OK. Now, OK had a record shop.
Yes.
And I was so into music. So when my mother said, go look for your jersey,
you came out
I went to the record bar, pulled out an LP of Billy Paul, Only the Strong Survive. So when we get to the queue, my mother says, Ika Jesse how? What's your Jesse? I want this LP. We came here to buy you a Jesse. But the response that was beautiful was from the cashier. And he said, Mama, why do you worry yourself for somebody who wants to dance naked?
Oh, that's fantastic.
But yeah, I think that was my first payment. And then thereafter, I think, I kept on doing, amateur productions and not getting paid. And I was lucky that in 1981, that's when I debuted. I had my professional debut with Gibson Kente. So I never got. Well, I did carry sets, but not to be paid. To be able to see the shows.
Yes.
So because when Gibson Kente shows would come to play in Atteridgeville, we would wait. I mean, we'll see basically first the banners, and we know on this day they're coming, and we will lay the bus when it comes to Atteridgeville Hall, so that we help them, with the sets and, set it up in order for me to be able to get in free, And I think it was 79, I had written a one-man show, which I presented at the Pretoria Theatrical Festival. And my play won the festival. And when this group of schoolgirl and the taxi men of Gibson Kent, I performed the play for them. And they were like, wow, where Danny? You do a one-man show, The following year, these guys basically, when Gibson was looking for an actor, they said, "Hey, Bragib, there's a lighty in Atteridgeville. Let's go and get him." And that's how I started getting paid in 1981.
Was there pressure on you at the time from family, other people in your community, maybe older men, older women, who said to you, "You can't do this acting thing. You need to go into a factory. You need to get regular money"? Because times were tough then. Very tough in the township.
I was fortunate. My stepfather was amazing. that's why I keep saying him. Mark is my stepfather's saying.
Oh, wow.
I remember, I think the year before after one of the shows of Gibson Kent, there was an announcement that those Baragib is looking for actors and people can come and audition the following day. I went back home and said, hey, Mama, they're looking for actors. I want to go. And my stepfather said, no, finish your matric first and then you can do whatever you want. And that was it. And when I passed my matric, and they came to look for me, my stepfather said, well, you go do it. And I later came to understand why he said that. I think many years later, because it was in 81, 88, I had the opportunity to perform in, to be included in a movie called A Dry White Season.
Yes, famous movie. Yes.
Yeah.
Famous book.
And famous book as well. And the movie was shot in Zimbabwe.
Yeah.
And I had my scene had to be reshot, and I was called to go and do it in London, and that was my burst. When I flew to London, it was first class. It was done by MGM. So I'm flying first class. I get to the airport. There's a chauffeur with a big Mercedes Benz.
Wow.
And I'm taken to the Athenaeum hotel in London, suite. And I was like, I've arrived.
And you were a young man then.
I was 28 then.
Yeah.
And now there I actually now get to meet Marlon Brando.
Gee.
Yeah. Gee. And when I came back, so I come back, with stories and presents and gifts. And and prior to that, because I did stop acting, I think, between 82 and 84. And I went back in 85. And my biological father, when I said I want to go back into acting, he said, oh, now you want to be like your uncle, because I had an uncle who was an actor and he worked with Gibson Kent, Kenny Majosi. So you want to be like your uncle and be, end up just being, be killed by drinking. I said, hey, I don't know about that. My stepfather was interested. When I told him that I'm going back into acting, he said, wise decision. So I didn't ask that because all I just wanted was approval. So coming back from London now, after giving presents and the whole excitement, the thought came. And I asked him, why did you say I made a wise decision? And then he started explaining, I tried to do this. I always tried pushing you to go and do this. And the only time you would do something without anybody pushing you from behind was when you started doing this acting of yours. Because you'll go into the garage and you'll be talking alone there. And then sometimes I'll come and interrupt you and say, hey, go cut the lawn. You go cut the lawn so fast so that you go back there. And I said, well, that's what makes him tick.
I mean, it's the age-old thing. If you're if you do something you enjoy, you'll be good at it.
Yeah.
And financially, you should be fine. I mean, life is more complicated. Yeah, life is more complicated.
What I always say is that it's fame with no fortune to match.
Yes. So, I mean, on that, with a career as an actor, the English phrase is feast or famine. You get a lot of stuff and then you get nothing for a while. And over time, you have to learn how to manage that. It's fine if you're 28 and maybe you have children. But as you get older, you have to manage it more and more. What's that been like for you?
It has been a challenge. It really has been a challenge. But like I say, I think one thing that saved me was kind of like maintaining a very, low lifestyle and never, trying to live up to the image or keeping up appearances.
Kills people that, eh?
Yeah, and I think just by allowing myself to live, I'm still living in Dubai. That actually helped me to make that even when, because there's a saying, location, which means, I don't know how to translate that, living in the township, you actually you are able to hide, your inadequacies or even your lack of finance. Because you don't, you can buy yourself a quarter, and people don't think but it will be like, hey, times are hard. So, but it was a way of managing, finding time, managing money as best as you can. But it was always a challenge, And what didn't even make it easy is that now, when you now become known, then you become target for people who wants to bring you down. The cancellation, culture, and that, basically, because I did suffer an article which actually said lies about me, and that blocked, made life difficult for me for a while.
So, I mean, on that point, I'm not going to push you. We're the money show. We don't go into people's personal lives.
Yeah.
But you have been, I mean, some difficult articles about you have been published in the last 24 hours. And these things are difficult and they're messy and they're none of my business. But when you find yourself in the headlines like that, the personal must affect your professional life.
At first it did, but in a very weird way, somehow I've kind of developed a tough skin or a hard skin.
Yeah.
I mean, this Sunday, basically, I was all over the newspapers. And I've just developed a hard skin, a tough skin, and just say, hey, that's, it will blow away at some point, but I know it's not going to blow away quickly. Because at the moment I'm even experiencing where I think I'm being hacked in order to try and push something on my social media, platforms,
sure.
And said.
But it costs you money in the end.
And that's the intention, to actually cost me money.
I mean, these things are very difficult, and I suppose it's one of the. I know some people will say it's the price of being in the public eye. But when you were a young man in 1982, you probably didn't see it being like this.
No, I was actually even shocked when I think the generation and Bophelo Sempeho fame came. It was a blow to me. It shocked me. After that, I would get invited to go to beauty contests, and I was like, what do I have to do with beauty contests?
Yes.
I'm just an actor. But I guess, now you've kind of entered into the celebrity status, and one thing that I hated about it actually affected my acting. Because now I became too self-conscious and too aware of myself. Yeah. And it actually even robbed me the space of working in privacy. I would even suffer the pressure of when I'm in let's say in a play, now that I'm still I'm expected to be gliding. And yet, no, I just want to, work slowly and get whatever I want, how I want to play the role the best way that I can. But in almost like privacy. So, one thing that did, it made me to lose my privacy. I couldn't live in my own thoughts. When I'm in the street, I'm constantly aware that somebody, hey, it's him. My uncle used to call me Mahlale Konja, the one who's always pointing.
I read, it was Alistair Campbell. He is a political person, a media person in Britain, and he once wrote that praise gets in the way. And it took me, I read it as a much younger man, and it took me a long time to kind of understand that when people praise you or critique you, it can get in the way because you forget what you're trying to do. It sounds like maybe you had a similar experience.
I had a similar experience, even though I had a way of trying to cope with it. Who was this motivational speaker, Les Brown?
Yeah.
And I picked up a very, a quote from him, where he said, anybody's opinion about me is not my reality.
Yeah.
And I actually kind of like lived by that. Whether you say I'm good or what, that is your opinion. I know the challenges that I have. And basically when I'm alone, I basically deal and work on those challenges, And I think that is what I think has kept my sanity throughout this thing. And it's only now, surprisingly so, that I have actually just managed to just jump that hurdle of being self-consciousness or of self-consciousness.
It's a difficult thing to do. We're talking about the My Money journey of Selo Makakangube this evening. He's with us until 8 o'clock.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa CIB, a Pan-African bank invested in your story and the potential it can unlock because your story matters. Absa is a registered FSP.
Talking tonight to Selo Makakangube, the actor. You know him, of course. You know him well, I'm sure. Selo, there will be moments in life where you have to, particularly where your professional life is a life of projects. I'm doing this now. You're doing the suit at the moment. Things like that. See, I told you I'd get it in somehow. and there'll be some projects you do because you know they're going to make money, and there'll some you do because you want to do it. How do you manage that? Because you have to eat.
Theater is labor of love. You don't really make money out of theater. But I love theater for one reason, because that is where you really kind of like hone your craft. That is where you develop your technique. The whole thing of having to perform. I know Marlon Brando hated theater. I was listening to one interview of his. He hated theater. So doing the same thing every day. But I enjoy that because, I always say that when you are performing a role, you're trying to capture a lifetime in 90 minutes. And now to marry yourself and maybe embody that life that has been a lifetime, and make sure that your interpretation actually is endowed and imbued with that person's life experience, and even when you walk, you live it, and nothing almost is like trying to shut out the world. It's a challenge. But you develop a technique. I've developed now a technique that what I will do is like just follow the series of actions so intently and so meticulously that somewhat then I get lost, and I even forget, that Silo exists, and will remember Silo really exists, when the curtain falls.
When the suit comes off.
But yeah, and the suit was a very, a project that it was directed by Barney Simon, the former, the founder of the late founder of the Market Theatre, and he was an amazing director, And for me, it was the turning point of my acting career,
It's what sort of everything else came
and
from.
so and it's still on. Come see it, please. Come
Stop. We had an agreement about how far we were going to go. So one of the things that you have to deal with. So there are plenty. So we see you on the stage. There's a lot that goes on before that. You have to deal with directors. You have to be directed.
Yeah.
That can also be, quite complex, I imagine. And there's a whole economy around all of those people. I suppose there's a big entrepreneurial spirit I've always found among people who are in the theatre, because they have to actually find a way to do what they love, and they have to then find a way to make money out of it. It's the making money out of it that's the entrepreneurial thing. You must have seen that happen a million times.
And I think basically, even one thing that I discovered was that I think artists have the entrepreneurial spirit.
Yeah.
We just don't know how to sometimes to translate it better into money. I used to, when you hear people who are in business, I'm in business,
I know the type. They're on the show often, pretty much all day.
And
yes.
that led me to actually, I had a friend who was in business, and I said, hey man, when you go to these seminars, please invite me, because you guys fascinate, I'm in business, So I went to a couple of seminars, and when I get there, first and foremost, I'll be, I've been following your work and whatever. And then they will ask me, so you're in business? And I would say, yes. And they would say, what business? And I say, show business. But yeah, but what business? So show business is not actually looked at as business. And yet it is business. It's just that maybe in our country, we haven't elevated to that point where it is really like in the UK, in the US, that it is really proper business. But also one thing that I like is like, younger actors, they say, I'm still working on my brand, I'm still working on my brand. And the thing is, your brand was made long before you even knew that you are a brand. And I think for me, what really signifies that one is a brand is your fingerprint.
Yeah.
And what you actually need, or what you want to say, is that I want to read the fine print of what this brand is made of.
When you started, you mentioned handbills, so little bits of paper that would say this play is coming. Now it's all social media, Instagram, all of those things. The way that your business has become marketed has changed completely. It's become much more visual as well. So there was a time that the only time someone would know Selo Makangube, what you looked like, was if they'd actually seen you and maybe a small, probably badly photocopied black and white picture, right? Now, people will see you all the time, everywhere, in the highest definition one can imagine.
Absolutely, and even for what is it, coding rehearsals.
Yes,
to that extent. Mm-hmm.
So it's much more. So your life, in a way, is much more in your face than it was when you started. What's that like?
I think it's a challenge, and how to kind of like maintain your privacy as the person, but also in maintaining that privacy, play that I'm unconscious yet conscious, or unconscious yet conscious, or unconscious yet unconscious, and you basically like negotiate that fine line. Pretend to be unconscious and yet you are conscious that you are doing something, and I think also that is the beauty of it all for me.
That's why people watch you. They don't come to watch the character; they come to watch you play the character.
Exactly. Yes, and I mean, I get into trouble for saying that. This whole thing of when I get into character, because I think because at the end of the day, character is defined by actions. So by following a series of actions already, if I want to be a thug, I will be, the writer shall have written a series of actions that the thug does, and you don't need to get into character to do that. You don't get into character to do what you are doing. You know what I mean? You just, I've got to do this. And you just follow whatever, with your sound man there, and that's what it is for me.
Silo, I've really enjoyed the last half hour. Thank you for your time.
Thank
you very much
Thank
indeed.
you very much.
Silo Maka Kangube, of course, the actor, and of course, someone who you know very, very well. Very glad that he's been able to spend half an hour with us on The Money Show.